It's been a major day here, day one of the Farnborough International Air Show 2024. Boeing has secured almost 80 orders for their aircrafts, almost all of them being wide body. We've got Airbus with only 5 orders. Is that going to be the trend for the week? Who knows? We're going to discuss all the major talking points of the day. This is the Daily Roundup. And welcome to the show. It's been a really impressive day here, I think we can both agree. Boeing's shown a lot of confidence in their market domination once again. Nearly 80 wide-body orders done today, James. What are your thoughts on that so far?
Well, it's definitely been a big day for wide-body orders, particularly for the 777X and the 787. It's going to be a major boost for the 777X program in particular, especially with the delays on certification at the moment. As for the 787, the continued backlogs are really good, but the issue at hand is delivery delays and supply chain issues. So at the moment, it's all well and good securing all these orders, but Boeing have got to be able to deliver, as does the rest of the industry as well.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we talked a lot in the past about the Dreamliner issues. We've discussed predominantly about the fact that they had issues in production lines in the final assemblies. It's caused a lot of delays. They've had issues with engine manufacturers. How do you sort of feel about the Korean Air order and the Japan Airline order in particular, where they've sort of actively encouraged and promoted them back to the Dreamliner program, despite all the issues Boeing have had recently?
So I think at the moment that there's a major issue here, and airlines are wanting to grow, but they can't, and it's being stunted because of these supply chain issues. So again, this is why we're seeing, late delivery slots. So for example, the Korean Air order for 777X and 787s aren't expected to take place until 2028, with those deliveries concluded in 2031. So it's taken a bit more long-term thinking from airlines in terms of that growth strategy, and it has to be more gradual than it is rapid.
Yeah, and obviously in particular, Japan Airlines very confident, based on the press conference we were at today, that they will get their Dreamliners in time. Very interesting to see if that will come to fruition, I think. And how Boeing was sort of going to combat the changes they're going to make, particularly in the wake of all the things that have happened with the court cases in America, and of course all the challenges they faced in their production facilities, and sort of looking forward as well, because the backlogs now are getting quite severely large. So you sort of wonder, can Boeing maintain that quality in order to get those planes out and keep that commitment to Korean Air and to Japan Airlines? So, of course, the other option today as well, as we mentioned before, we looked at the 777X. We've been today to the 777X cabin setup, the display. What were your thoughts on that? How did you find that?
Well, it was such a strange development, because as soon as you walked into that cabin, you didn't feel like you were walking into an airplane.
Yeah.
It was so spacious, even for long haul aircraft. It was something as similar as, in terms of space, like on the Airbus A380, which, is it the question that Boeing is trying to target that sort of market, via the 777X, or are they going to try and advance it even further than the product offering that the A380 offered?
Right, exactly. And I think that dynamic's really interesting, because obviously when you looked at the cabin layout and what they had, it was interesting how they'd incorporated Dreamliner functionality with 777 seating formats, but they'd gone for A380 style space in, cabin storage and all those things. I think the most notable aspect for me, and I don't know if it was for you, particularly when we looked at the cabin storage options for bags and for the customer experience side of things, I personally found the design in itself to look like it might be lacking in that aspect. So potentially what we're sort of seeing in the mock-ups are not necessarily what we're actually going to see in the final product for airlines. Are airlines really keenly going to go for those overhead bins? We did obviously find the overhead bins in the center. They are extended extra large bins, as we discussed. However, they are so high up. And of course, we're average height people as well, just under 6 foot tall, even if it doesn't look like it on camera. But we struggle to reach those overhead bins in the middle. And that sort of, there's a question of safety, I think, involved in that aspect. Like, it's all very well and good that we look at these large cabins as overhead bins, putting the bags everywhere and having all that space. But if it's going to come at the expense of the flight attendants and the rest of the crew, is it necessarily going to be something safe that we want to sort of continue to see in industry? That's sort of the question, really, isn't it? And how's that going to look or transpire inside aircraft, and particularly with different airlines with their own unique twist on things? Will they keep that format inside of their layouts?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's kind of a two-pronged sort of approach here. So the first part is how the operators will actually configure those aircraft, during that production process. And then the second step is safety. Now, as we know, Boeing is undergoing significant change at the moment, and it's one of those that when it comes to flight certification, safety, is paramount in that, and they need to make sure that all the systems within the cabin work safely, because we've obviously seen over the last few months, particularly on turbulence incidents, for example, that is a major, major new breed of incident developing, within the aviation industry. So it is definitely something that will be looked at by Boeing, but will also be looked at by the operators as well.
Yeah, I think so as well. And it's interesting how you mentioned safety, because obviously the one big point that stood out to me was how in the 777X experience, in the cockpit and the cabin layout they had, very bizarre how they'd made sort of the overhead panels very small and thin and very much tucked to the sides. Interesting to see how that would work, particularly in emergency situations. Is that potential indication they're looking at different storage options for the oxygen masks, which of course are a mandate by the FAA and the EASA and all other safety agencies across the world for aircraft. But how will they work? Because obviously where they're originally stacked right now, so through the images you're all seeing on your screen as well, you'll notice they really are stacked out on the side. So extended wiring, is that a trip hazard? And all these questions, I think, really need answering until we can really see the validity of what Boeing have sort of concepted here for the 777X, and whether it's actually going to have the impact I guess they're probably thinking it's going to have.
Yeah, for sure. I think ultimately, when it comes to things like certification, particularly in the context of Boeing at the moment, everything will be kind of, ripped apart, with a fine-tooth comb, analysed, looked over, tested, stress tested. So I think with that in mind, the FAA will no doubt make the recommendations that they need to before obviously it goes to the next stage, which will then be, subsequent certification in Europe with EASA, who are also very well known for, sort of very stringent regulations, and rightly so in this industry. So it's going to be interesting to see what the results come up from in regards to what the FAA can see themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously from one cabin setup straight to another, we were very fortunate today. We've been to the British Airways A320neo, which is sort of just off the shot to our right. Interesting new cabin layout, I think, really interesting. Lots of really cool features. It is, of course, the newest cabin that they're going to install across their entire fleet. I think far more modern of a look for BA is the first initial thing I noted. And also very interesting changes, I think, how they've adapted basic things like signage and technology, and certainly disability access and usability for disabled passengers. Very intriguing, particularly in an aircraft so small as the A320. Obviously, when it comes to 777 and the A380s, which they've sort of implied are not far away from completing their retrofit programs themselves, so potentially something we might see this year, or even in the start of next year, into the new year, or maybe the start of the new year. Interesting, I think, for me personally. I really like it. I think it sort of elevates BA back up to that higher level. For many years, I think it's fair to say they've probably lacked in their end product design. But what are your thoughts on it specifically? What was it about it that you really liked, but the things you just didn't like? What did really caught your attention?
Yeah, I think ultimately, touching upon your point, over the last 5-10 years, British Airways has had a lot of criticism when it comes to their product offering, and what we've seen today on the A320neo was a brilliant example of how £7 billion of transformation investment is being used. Obviously, that whole 7 billion
it's not all there,
but it shows the stepping stones that British Airways has taken to restore, that level of status and legacy that they used to be well known for. And that, alongside newer generation aircraft, newer cabins, an expanded route network, which is what we've seen over the course of this year with British Airways through, new flights to Abu Dhabi, amongst other areas around the world. I feel like they've taken the opportunity at Farnborough very well, and I think they are going to showcase what will be the new era of British Airways going into the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think obviously it's be really intriguing for me to sort of see how that design translates onto the larger aircraft. Of course, in the A320, there's only so much they can do. It is a very small aircraft, so they've been very limited on trim options, as they talked about. They've been very limited on certain lighting options that they talked about as well. But of course, when it comes to a wide-body aircraft, as British Airways sort of alluded to, there is this great option where they can adapt the smooth lighting technique, something that's become very common, I think, now on a large wide-body aircraft. It's all about making the experience of the customer more pleasurable and using lights and sensors to relax people as they travel. Particularly important, I think, in an era now where we're looking at these ultra-long-haul services. I mean, we've got, Dallas to Qatar is one as well. And of course, we got Heathrow direct to Perth, and they are long flights, 14 plus hours. It's a long time to be on a plane. You really need an aircraft that's sort of purpose built, I think, really, to not just make the customer feel important and comfortable. Of course, that goes without saying, but it's also about that premium product finished line as well. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that update really has brought British Airways back up to that level that in perhaps recent years they've somewhat really lacked in.
No, I think also, based on what we've seen with, the very updated cabin in the A320neo, I think that does provide a sense of huge excitement for what that will look like on the wide body market, particularly with long haul flights and things like that. So it is a very exciting time for British Airways, I feel. Obviously, as we've said at the beginning, the airline has, had a lot of criticism over the years for their product offering, but the fact that they're listening now, they're investing the money that they need to. That is what matters now, and that is what is going to propel them to become one of the greatest legacy carriers in the world again.
Yeah, I agree. And I think obviously it'd be interesting to see how this £7 billion is spent. Obviously, as we alluded to, it's not all going to the interior of the aircraft. They are looking at updating their finished product inside of their lounges and obviously the services they're providing for their business and first class passengers. But I'm really intrigued to see how that's all going to sort of come together, because of course we have got mass limitations, particularly in the UK at airports like Gatwick and Heathrow. It's not easy to spend money and get mass changes done. They've, of course, it's not so recently, but in recent years, they've added the Concorde Lounge, which is a nice twist in for the first class passengers. And I think it should be really interesting to see how that all sort of transpires and looks across their entire global network, particularly in airports where they don't get as much as a say, such as San Francisco and JFK, and how is that going to look ultimately when it's all done. So I think it's really intriguing, and I think we can all agree from a British Airways perspective, the future's looking relatively good.
No, it absolutely is. And I feel like that's why British Airways decided to come to Farnborough, because for them to attend is, almost a rarity in some cases. So I think they have came here with a renewed sense of confidence, optimism, and they want to show people that they now mean business and that they are going to restore themselves once again.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, we can sort of now move on from one Airbus, as they say. Briefly touch on, of course, we do have the Airbus A350 Air India behind us. Now, we're not sort of going to go into that today. That's more of a tomorrow's recap thing. We're very fortunate. We've sort of got an access tour inside the cabin for that. And we'll really get to the nitty gritty of what it is that they've added into their new services, how the new cabin is integrated for the better customer experience, and how that's sort of elevating the Indian market and the Indian carriers, again, a level up. And really, in a way, bringing them to the forefront, catching up with those large European legacy carriers, those large US legacy carriers. And of course, their industry growing so fast, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these long-haul aircraft go into the Indian market. They're going to be not just being doing domestic services, they're going to be adding a lot more international commercial services. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see that tomorrow. So we'll get into that tomorrow. But the major talking point, I think, is Airbus. Absolutely no orders today.
Well, they've only had the one order, which was from Drucker for the 3 A320neos and 2 A321XLRs. You know, personally, knowing the difficulty of landing into Farnborough Airport in Bhutan, I'd be curious to see what routes Drucker plan to launch from Farnborough with the 321XLR particularly. But with the 320neos, those aircraft have already been well known to go into Farnborough, you know, quite easily. But yeah, it's been a bit of a quiet show from Airbus today. You know, a big focus for them this week is going to be obviously the A350, securing more orders for that, especially with the strong showing that Boeing have had today with the 787 and 777X. So I think tomorrow what we'll see is, you know, Airbus will probably do what Boeing did first thing this morning, where it was just announcement after announcement after announcement. You know, because they obviously wanted to get on a, you know, on a brilliant footing for day one.
Exactly.
So tomorrow should be interesting. You know, I think even if Airbus don't really score that many orders, it's not really that much of an issue. As we stated in a previous video on our channel, you know, they have got an extremely healthy backlog, over 7,000 aircraft in the backlog, which will keep them well going into the 2030s. So at the moment, whether Airbus is just going to remain, you know, kind of reserved at this air show, we don't know. Is tomorrow going to be a completely different picture? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we already know Airbus 10,000 aircraft in the backlogs for orders already. That's a substantial order amount, and a large portion of those going to EasyJet and Indigo, who ordered over 500 aircraft, of course, as we remember. I think it was back in Paris last year that order went through. So potentially not going to really see much from Airbus this week at all, potentially. I think it's intriguing to sort of understand why. From Airbus's perspective, I'd imagine they're sort of looking at it and going, we don't really need to announce anything. We kind of have that market domination already. And you sort of question, if that's the case and we've not seen any MAX orders, has the confidence been lost in the MAX? Are Boeing going to struggle to break back into that regional market, particularly in Europe, which Airbus are now just seem to be running away with? I don't really know. I think it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. And it also leaves a lot of questions to be answered if Airbus make no orders, or announce no orders, rather, this particular air show, particularly live with the press here. Of course, they did announce that order, as you mentioned, of the 5 aircraft today, but that was not done live with the media presence or the airline execs on site. And yeah, you know, I guess when the airline execs come on site, in a way, that kind of actively promotes not just commitment, but it also promotes surety and assurance inside the product. And of course, the big talking point, which we sort of mentioned today, is there are rumors going around that the CEO of Airbus has been meeting with the guys at Rolls-Royce. So potentially we're looking at a new engine provider for the A350-1000. Of course, they've had a lot of issues with the engines. It's been a massive talking point since the aircraft's been released and entered service. It continues to be a talking point. Who knows? Potentially we're looking at an A350neo before we'd even be expecting to see another airline, another generation of aircraft come out of Airbus. And I just think it's interesting to see how that's all going to sort of pan out, particularly with the A321XLR almost entering service.
Yeah, I think ultimately, you know, Guillaume Faury being spotted with execs at Rolls-Royce, it's an interesting one, and it's a topic that's, you know, been ongoing since the Dubai Air Show last year, because as everyone in this industry knows, when it came to the Emirates order for the A350s, that was announced very last minute, because Emirates predominantly went to the Boeing side with 777Xs, 787s, the works. And I think within that, you know, is it the fact that there's going to be an A350neo for the 1000? Maybe not. Maybe it's the fact that Rolls-Royce have actually improved on the engine durability issues on the XWB-97s. So that could be another factor. You know, whether we may see the presence of Emirates ordering, you know, the Dash 1000 to complement a Dash 900 is also another story to be seen as well.
Yeah, or potentially, as we've seen in the past, sometimes you do get with Etihad and with Emirates, Etihad might increase their order at this air show, and Emirates eventually do purchase them off their sister airline. Obviously, they're not owned by the same person, we should point that out, but they are, from what I understand, owned roughly through the same royal family, and so they do have the shared aircraft and shared crew policies that they've activated before, many times before. And of course, I think what's an interesting talking point, and I think it's a point that I'm sort of interested to know all of your opinions on, is Do we think the A330neo program is going to be axed after this air show if it continues to get no orders? We are approaching, I think, now about 1 year since the last major order for that aircraft. There's been no rumor mill popping around. There's been no real discussion of potentially A330neo orders. Is that potentially something we might see at this air show from Airbus? Might they well announce the Neo's being axed?
Well, I mean, I would find it very, very unlikely that they would announce its axing per se. But obviously, it's it's an interesting question that has been on the industry's mind a lot. And I think within that, obviously Virgin have got their 330 Neo here. It's a brilliant aircraft to see. I just think there may be too many similarities between, say, the 330 Neo and the A350, because as well as legacy carriers like Delta purchasing the 330 Neo, what we've seen typically from 330 Neo operators are the likes of Cebu Pacific, where it is high density sort of operations. So are there enough customers in the market for an A330 Neo at all, whether it be high density, whether it be your legacy density, per se?
Yeah,
so
and obviously
it's definitely going to be an interesting one to see, that's for sure.
Yeah, and obviously, as we know, the A321XLR is kind of a confusing aircraft in many ways, because it does actually directly attack the A330-800 Neo,
Yes.
which is interesting because that has been an aircraft that Boeing have historically struggled to sell. It's not something that airlines are all that keen on. And now, really, with the A321XLR entering service in, I believe it's 1 year now, and we should see it enter its first commercial service.
So entry into service for the 321 XLR is going to be later this year.
Later this year, okay, there you go.
So, but it's funny because I remember interviewing Darren Hulst at Boeing around 2 years ago, and he basically labelled the 321 XLR as niche. But on the other hand, the A321 XLR has its quirks and benefits where, long haul travel on on an aircraft potentially secondary markets. Is it a niche? Is it not a niche? It's definitely open to interpretation.
Yeah.
My belief, I think it's a well-positioned aircraft for the market, particularly for operators who may not be able to afford heavy machinery,
Such as the A350.
such as the A350 or the 330 Neo. So again, that's other aspects that have to be taken into consideration. We've just come out of a pandemic. Yes, travel demand is strong, but airlines are trying to, either save money or spend money.
Yeah.
And that's where the A321 XLR comes into a kind of unique play.
Yeah. And of course, the A321 XLR, in a way, it's interesting that Boeing would refer to it as such a niche plane, because as we know, it's pretty much the only viable replacement for the 757s.
Yes.
All of which now we see very regularly pop up with issues in flight. They're having hydraulic issues or leaking issues. Now, of course, I should point out, it's nothing to do with Boeing. That is just the aircraft getting really old. They've been in service the best part of 30 years now. Most of them, if not some of them, even 50 years.
Yeah.
So they are coming to the end of their life cycles. And so the question really is what's there to replace them? And of course, with the 737 MAX 10, I think the only way to describe it is lost. Yeah. It's just lost. It's, it's like a duck on land. You just don't really know where Boeing are really trying to go with it. There's a lot of issues surrounding it. Is it ever going to get its FAA approval? Will we see its mass deployment that I guess Boeing in a way kind of hoped they would to combat that A321 XLR dominance? And I don't think we're going to see it. And so you kind of feel like the only people that can really stop Airbus from running away with this, in a way, which is very bizarre to say, is kind of Embraer. You would expect the E2 to be the only solution as an option against it.
So yes and no. So yes, because in the past, Embraer has been considering, bringing a new commercial program to the market away from the E2, which is more in the seat segment, similar to the 737 MAX, 320 Neo, that kind of thing. Now, we don't know, much more development on that at this present time. But if Embraer has a really, really good opportunity here, because of the delays on the Maxes, it opens up the prospect of, bringing a new aircraft to market, securing orders with a quicker delivery lead time than, say, on Boeing. Because with Boeing, remember, it's not just the MAX 10, it's also the MAX 7 as well. the Max 7, has been going through exemptions, some certification issues.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect that has to be taken into account. But I think Boeing generally, I think, they've got no choice but to kind of continue on the path that they're at the moment. They have got to take certification slowly, seriously, safely,
Well, of course, yeah.
so it's one of those where, maybe over the next 5-10 years, we'll see Boeing, obviously be a bit behind Airbus in that regard. But I think once they've got the issues ironed out and, certification of the Max 7 and the Max 10 is complete, as well as the 777X, then we'll be able to see a fully functioning Boeing that is delivering aircraft to the point that when backlogs get lower, then that means a new aircraft can be brought to market that is going to be something similar or different, to the likes of the 321 XLR.
Yeah. And of course, I think the real thing for me personally, and we'd love to get your thoughts on this as well, of course, is the 777X, I guess, in a way, the kind of make or break for Boeing. I feel if the 777X sort of struggles, if it comes into service, it's plagued with issues, if it spends long times grounded, if it really struggles to get over all these FAA regulations that they put in place, particularly with the automated folding wingtips as they've discussed, is that kind of it, I guess, in a way for Boeing? Like, is there a way back? If the 777X falls at the hurdle, at the same safety hurdles, I guess it's important to say, because of course it is a new aircraft, so there are things that are uniquely different about it. So we can't paint Boeing with this tartan brush and be like, all aircraft are bad. Of course, not all aircraft are bad. Boeing do make good aircraft. But the question really is if the 777X struggles to get over the line, is that in a way kind of it for Boeing? Can Boeing really ever compete with Airbus again if that's the case?
Well, it's such a theoretical question. I mean, you can kind of think either way about it. I think Boeing are in a position now where, as I've said, they've got no choice but to adapt to the current conditions that they're in. Obviously the Alaska door plug incident really, shined a further light, on the issues ongoing there. But I'm a bit of an optimist. I personally believe that Boeing will get to where they need to be. Whether that takes months, years, so be it, as long as they have got a stream of safe aircraft that they're delivering to operators, and also the fact, that passengers are enjoying it as well, then, that's kind of all that matters at this stage. I think being in that mentality of, I've got to be above Airbus now,
yeah,
I think that those times are over for, for the short term for Boeing.
That rebuild process, right? It's a long-term project to get themselves back up to, I guess, the standard that, ironically enough, they set themselves. And so it's, in a way, it's kind of, I guess it's really the way that the industry, it's the ebbs and flows of our industry, really, in a way. We do see dominance of different manufacturers come and go, but it's interesting to see how Boeing set such a high standard for themselves and so seemingly fallen so far away from it. But it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how they sort of combat that, how they'll get back to that level, and of course all the steps. And as you said, it is really about delivering on the promises they made to their customers and stuff. And that goes without saying that it's massively important for Boeing that these aircraft just aren't delayed.
Yes.
Because in an industry where everything's moving so fast, I guess the one advantage Boeing has is Airbus aren't exactly in a position to quickly throw aircraft at a customer to take them away. So I guess customers can, in a way, delay a little bit to wait for this Boeing aircraft. But will they? And that's ultimately the question. It's a really dynamic market. The world is changing constantly. Our industry is massively changing. And so who knows? And I think it sort of leaves a lot to question Boeing for in maybe the next 5 years. Where would they be? Who really knows? But hopefully in a better position than they are now.
Yes.
I think from the general consensus we've had today in the media room and from speaking to some of the media staff members there is a vision that Boeing has on how they're going to get back to that level. They do have this clear structure. They're working towards it slowly. Will it be fast enough to get the 777X on time, delivered as the customer expects it, with no issues? It's a lot to ask. And I think the other issue that Boeing's sort of got in this aspect is they're at the mercy of the engine manufacturers who, of course, are suffering their own issues. They've plagued the A350 with issues. The A321neos have had issues. The A330neos have had issues. And of course, I know in an aspect like that, it might sound like, well, it's an all Airbus issue. But it's more the engine that's the issue rather than Airbus themselves that are the problem. And so, and it's kind of this, but it's kind of the reverse for Boeing. The engines are fine, but the aircraft themselves are the problem. So it's interesting to sort of see how that dynamic really sort of building on itself and going back and forth in our industry. But yeah, I think interesting week ahead of us. So what have we got on tomorrow? We've got the Embraer announcements. We're expecting large orders, I think, for the Embraer aircraft.
Yes, so with Embraer, typically what they do at an air show is that they allocate one day and then they offload all of their orders over the course of a 1-hour press conference. So be sure to head over to the Aviation Source website where you can follow the live developments as they come in. It should be around 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon UK time. And then, you know, ultimately, whatever else comes from Boeing and Airbus. We've also got ATR, who have also not recorded any orders today. Is that going to change over the next few days? We don't know. We shall see.
Yeah, incredible. And of course, we should mention before we round off today, we are currently running a giveaway. We're giving away up to $2,000 worth of flight vouchers. The giveaway is still open. You'll be able to find all the information for the giveaway in the description below this video. Please do enter it. Don't miss out with a chance to win up to $2,000 worth of flight vouchers. And it is, of course, to celebrate our presence at the Farnborough International Air Show 2024. But thank you so much for tuning in, of course, for the daily roundup today. From myself, Tom, and from James, I want to thank you so much. Be sure to check out the giveaway in the description below. And of course, we will leave you now with some footage from the day's events. Thank you.